Balaton-Almádi is one of the most touristic towns at the Lake Balaton, the lake where every Hungarian goes every summer to bathe in the water and eat some greasy food. And this was also the town where Rehák Gizella lived. No one who passed by her could do so without noticing her extraordinary beauty. Even though there are no pictures online of Gizella, her daughter Bernadette can probably attest to her mother's beauty as well, because Bernadette was elected Miss Hungary in 1992, and then she also participated that same year at the Miss World contest.
Hello, I am Bernadette Pap. I am from Balaton-Almádi. I am 19 years old and I'm a student.
But knowing all this, we can only imagine how beautiful Gizella could have been. She always kept fit, even at the age of 45. She was twice divorced and she had only one daughter, and at the time of her tragic murder, she lived alone and was single. But that doesn't mean that she was lonely, because town rumor had it that she loved men. She was quite a man-eater and she frequently changed her boyfriends, some of which were significantly younger than her. She worked as an insurance agent, but she sometimes took on other jobs, for example housekeeping, mostly abroad, namely in Germany. And soon after returning to Hungary from one of her trips to Germany, she was found dead in a pool of her own blood on the street in front of her own home. The 13th of November 1995 started out like any other day for Rácz Zoltán. He was a newspaper delivery guy, but he also had a day job. So every day he had to wake up very early in the morning, usually at around 3 a.m., to pick up the parcel of newspapers so that he could deliver them to everybody in the town before his shift started. And that is exactly what he did that same day. As he was walking up the street, he saw what looked like a lamp on the road. At first, he thought that it could have been either a drunk man or a homeless man who passed out. And he even thought to himself that if that person stays lying on the cold ground in this freezing November morning, that person could freeze to death pretty fast. So he put his bike by the fence and ran closer. But that was when he saw that it was not a passed out drunk homeless man on the street. It was the dead body of a woman lying in a large pool of blood, covered in multiple stab wounds. Of course, the police was called and an investigation was launched. It was clear that the victim was Gizella, and she lived in the house in front of which she was found dead. The police figured that she must have been attacked within her own home because there were some poorly targeted stabs on her bed as well. But Gizella was still in her power and she was still strong enough, even after 37 stabs, to escape the scene. She climbed through the window and dragged herself to the street, assumably to call for help. But sadly, by that time she had lost way too much blood and she collapsed. And sadly, she bled to death before anyone could have helped her. She died a few hours before she was discovered, though the exact time of her death is not published or it couldn't be established. And the question arises, how could she be stabbed 37 times and still not die instantly and still survive for so long? But there is a much more important question to ask for the investigators. Who could stab someone 37 times and still not manage to kill the victim instantly? The investigators had to think logically here. Most men who turn to murder are able to overpower an average woman, stabbing her faster, deeper, stronger, causing her to die instantly. It was not that far-fetched to think that Gizella's attacker was probably someone of a weaker physique, either a skinny and unfit man or a similarly skinny and unfit woman. But why? Because one well-targeted stab can be fatal to anyone, But somehow those 37 stabs were not enough to kill Gizella right away. She died of a long and miserable blood loss, but maybe none of those 37 stab wounds were actually fatal if it wasn't for the blood loss, if you know what I mean. It is also probable that the attacker was someone that Gizella personally knew, maybe even someone that she would be comfortable letting in her home even late at night, because there were no signs of forced entry on her door. As you already know, she was single and lived alone, and her daughter Bernadette was living in South Africa at the time. But the police had no choice to look anywhere else other than the people in Gizella's life. They had to figure out who could hold so much hatred towards this woman. But they didn't have an easy time doing that, because if you remember, Gizella was quite the man-eater. She frequently changed her partners, and therefore the police rightfully assumed that such an aggressive and torturous murder could be the result of something related to that. And as I mentioned before, a grown, strong man probably wouldn't attack a woman in the same way as Gizella was. So there are two reasonable possibilities here. The attacker could have either been a bitter and angry man whose sexual or romantic advancements Gizella declined, probably exactly because of his unfit or unattractive looks. Don't forget that Gizella was supposed to be smoking hot. She could definitely refuse to date somebody that was, so to speak, not in her league. But it could have also been a jealous and revengeful woman whose husband maybe Gizella seduced, whether it was purposeful or not. And these are very likely theories, but the police simply couldn't find anyone who would match this profile. Well, at least not until they started looking into people abroad. Gizella only moved into her new home in Balaton-Almádi a few days before the murder, but before that she used to live in a German town called Firnheim, working there as a housekeeper for a year. And there she met and had a love affair with a younger Hungarian man. And when the police questioned him, he gave contradicting statements. He denied having this love affair with Gizella, but he also didn't have a strong alibi for the time of the murder. So the police detained him. But he was set free just a few days later because the evidence left by the killer simply did not match him. He could not be the murderer. And after he was set free, he finally admitted to this secret love affair between him and Gizella, and he said that he didn't admit to it earlier because he was ashamed of sleeping with an older woman. Now, the following information is coming from a Hungarian journalist named Hardi Péter, whose book I am using as my main source in this case. Link in the description if you speak Hungarian. Now, he was the one to unearth all of the information that I'm going to share with you right now. And this next suspect is who I believe to be the key to solving this crime, but I may be wrong. It was yet another Hungarian man living in Germany, but the only thing we know about him is his name. He was called Karcsi, which is the nickname of Károly. But before I tell you more about him, I have to give you some context. As I have said before, Gizella only moved into her new home in Balaton-Almádi a couple of days before the murder, but she had purchased the home months in advance. The houses in Balaton-Almádi are usually vacation homes, so they lack insulation and heating, and therefore they are not habitable for long periods of times, and especially not in winter. So before Gizella could move in, she had to renovate it and equip it properly to be able to call it her new permanent home. After the renovations were finished, Gizella asked her brand new neighbor, a man named Gyula, if he wanted to keep her leftover bricks, and he said yes. But up until this point, the two never officially met. They never shook hands, introducing themselves. And this time too, they were only talking over the fence or through the fence. And as Gizella was passing these bricks over top of the fence and Gyula was taking them one by one, they had a little chit-chat. And Gizella said that she left a duck in the oven to bake, and she even bought some champagne because she was expecting a dinner guest. And it was the same day that she was murdered. Now, Gyula wasn't a nosy man. He didn't want to ask private questions from a woman that he had just met, so he didn't think to ask who this mysterious dinner guest was going to be, and the conversation ended after a minute or two. But according to some other witnesses or people that knew Gizella, they said that this mysterious dinner guest could have been a man named Karcsi, and the police were able to find only one man with this nickname, a man who coincidentally also lived in Germany at the time of the murder. But he and his wife were subjected to a polygraph test and they passed, so this Karcsi, whoever he was eliminated as a suspect pretty early on. And sadly, this tip really only led to more questions than answers, because it is unknown if there was another man named Karcsi that the police just couldn't find. And it's also probable that Gizella's dinner guest that she mentioned in this short conversation with her neighbor never even arrived to the dinner in the first place. And why can we think that? Well, first of all, there were no signs of a dinner party of any sort or any size in her home. And the food that was left on the table was missing only as much that would feed one person only. It is entirely possible that Gizella lied about expecting a dinner guest to her brand new neighbor because she just wanted to cut the awkward conversation short, or she wanted to pose as someone who had a serious boyfriend so that her neighbor wouldn't hit on her. That's a strategy that a lot of women have to use to avoid creepy men. On the other hand, maybe she was expecting a guest who never arrived, so Gizella had to eat dinner all by herself. But maybe her guest did arrive and left before the murder, and this guest didn't have anything to do with it at all, though that wouldn't explain why only one portion of the dinner was missing. It is also unknown if this Karcsi living in Germany was the same one as Gizella expected for dinner that night, or if the guest was named Karcsi in the first place. So this investigation didn't lead anywhere. And without any more suspects, any more evidence or leads, the case was closed in 1997, only to be reopened 8 years later in 2005. But sadly, the reopening of this case didn't lead to a conviction either. The final and feasible suspect was a man named Bújtás Viktor. He was considered as a suspect because he was skinny, unfit, and unattractive, just like how the police imagined the murderer to be. Besides, he lived right next door to Gizella in his grandmother's home. When this guy, Viktor, was requested to take a polygraph test, he first arrived drunk, so of course the test had to be postponed. And the second time around, he gave answers about things that only the murderer could have known. Furthermore, an unclassified person who usually washed Viktor's clothes came forward to the police saying that when she was washing his jeans, the water turned red as if they were stained with blood. And on top of that, even more earwitnesses came forward saying that they had heard Viktor say in public that in order to get rid of a murder weapon, you have to hide it at the murder scene but only after the scene had been searched by the police multiple times, because the police wouldn't think to look there again. And guess what? A bloody knife was found dug in Gizella's garden, but only after the scene had been searched multiple times. This bloody knife just seemed to appear in the ground like that after numerous searches. But this blood was tested on the knife and it was from an animal. And here is my speculation, and I am not a forensic expert of any sort, but wouldn't it be a good idea for the murderer to cover the murder weapon in animal's blood to sort of cover up that there was human blood on it before too? Like if the DNA mixes, then the police wouldn't be able to separate who or what the blood came from. But who knows, I'm just speculating here. But still, all the red flags pointed in Victor's direction. But it is not at all for sure that Victor had anything to do with Gizella's murder, because his father gave a very convincing alibi for the time of the murder. This information is also coming from that same journalist I had mentioned before. And this journalist made an interview with Victor's father, Bújtás János, who said that he, his brother, and another family friend were all spending the night together with Victor in his house, or more specifically in his grandma's house, which was next door to Gizella. They spent the night together drinking wine and just talking up until about 2 a.m. And they woke up in the morning all together. So that would give Victor a good alibi. Gizella's time of death either wasn't published or it couldn't be established, but it is assumable that she died a few hours before she was discovered. So probably sometime between 11 p.m. and maybe 3 a.m., but that's just my own speculation. And if this alibi that Victor's father gave is valid, then neither Victor nor any one of those men who spent the night there drinking and talking could have been the murderer, unless they were all in on it and they were all covering for each other. But that seems unlikely without any more information. I find it weird though that they were all up all night right next door to Gizella, and they didn't hear and didn't see anything. They didn't notice Gizella being violently murdered and then bleeding out on the street. And one more thing to add is that Victor's father said that whoever claimed that upon washing Victor's pants, jeans, the water turned red as if it was bloody was just a liar, because Victor never wore jeans. He always wore those construction worker onesies, you know what I mean? So he never even owned just pants or jeans of any sort. However, Victor was a sickly man. He suffered from some kind of a disease, and he spent more time at the hospital than outside. And by the time the police collected enough evidence against him to at least just try to interrogate him about Gizella's murder, Victor died. And if he had any secrets, he took those to the grave with him. I think at this point, the only key to solving this murder is if somebody comes forward with information that they have been keeping for so long, or if somebody is finally ready to make a deathbed confession. But until then, Gizella's murder remains unsolved. And that is all that I can tell you. If you liked my presentation of this case, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel and don't forget to turn on the notifications bell, because I post videos like this pretty much every week. Don't forget to like and comment something down in the comment section. I like interacting with you guys down there, and thank you very much for watching. I see you next time. Bye!